Thank you. I'm not going to stand behind the lectern like Tom. I like to wander. And I was just reflecting on what Tom's just walked us through. Pigs and lipstick. Tom has to tell a story about how good his client is to get their maximum return. What I do is no different. I actually went through a lot of those principles that Tom talked about. I have to do that every day of the week, just trying to find out whether someone is good enough to get a grant. 40 from 4 years ago when we first met calls me the flexi teller on wheels. Because businesses come to me and they think that's what I am. I'm a flexi teller on wheels to go and meet you, sing a good song, put the lipstick on the pig, and the government just hands over money. 2 years ago, it was that simple. It really was. And Rob and I often joke that my job 2 years ago was super simple. It really wasn't that difficult to write a submission, and we might have written one submission. There might be 200 or 300 in that grant program. You knew you were pretty much a successful outcome. Today, because we've got used to the gravy train of 2 years of government stimulus, it is now something like about 2,000 applicants in a program that 2 years ago there might have been 200 or 300. So it's a really interesting marketplace now in what we are. So the lipstick now, Tom, it's gold-plated lipstick that we have to play with. And all those points that he just went through to make sure your business is in the best shape possible, that's what we need from you when we work around a grant, is to make sure that your business does look like it's organised, it's successful, and it qualifies to get money because it's taxpayers' money. So at the Haystack Group, we started the business 15 years ago, and it was just to help people get into the export market. Over 15 years that's evolved now. We do a lot of strategic consulting. We sit there around the grant table with some of our clients, and we find that we might need Peter Lay to come on board. I've invited Nathan to come along as a guest today, and already he's interested in catching up with Tom. So part of what we do is connect people. It's like a mini Vic Leaders in what I do, is that often I'll see someone's business firsthand. They tell me their most intimate details of where their financials are at, where their family's at, their strategic plans in what they're doing. And quite often, it leads to the need for someone else in that Vic Leaders network that we're all part of to come on board, to shape up where they're at and what they're doing. So I thought, just because it really is the season of what we've got 6 weeks of polling, I'd start with a practice poll just to get you all in the idea of where we're at. So just a show of hands. Have you been successful with a grant? Is there anyone here that's actually done a grant and been successful themselves?
Do you mean outside of the COVID gravy train?
Yes, outside of the COVID gravy train. Because the COVID gravy train was pretty simple to get a grant. And if you didn't get one, it was probably through neglect more than anything else. Was the grant, Pete, more than $10,000?
There were a number, but it wasn't through business, it was in a sporting club. So.
Right. How much was that?
One for 5, 1 for 15.
Yep. 5 and 15. Think of those numbers. 5 and 15. It's not a lot of money for anything, whether it's a business or a sporting club. 15 grand does not go very far these days. The time that you put in to write the grant, Pete, was it worth it?
Not for me. I got someone else to do it. But yeah, it was fairly time.
Yeah.
Time consuming.
And that's the challenge that we have with a lot of grants, is that a lot of grant programs, you can spend hours writing the grant. We can spend hours writing the grant. But the process to get the money, to then acquit the grant, to say you've spent it, and what you've spent it on, sometimes actually outweighs the value of the money. And I look at my dear mum in Mansfield. She's part of the Anglican Church, and she rings me on a Sunday night and she says, we made $2,000 yesterday. There was 19 of them making scones on Easter Saturday at a bush market to make $2,000, and they were excited. If they had have got 5 of them to walk around with a hat and said, can you donate to the Anglican Church, they probably would have got $3,000 for a third of the amount of work. So it's something that people think grants is going to be the saviour, and it's not the be-all and end-all. So we actually talk some people out of a grant program just because it's not worth it. And this is the reason why, the fine print. The fine print's the ugly bit. We've all got fine prints in all of our industries, no matter what industry you're in. We have to work by policy objectives. We have to look at the frameworks in which the Act in 2013 was, and then there's the Commonwealth Grant Rules Guidelines and all these sorts of things. I don't read them. I need to know them, and that's often why we'll talk you out of a grant if it doesn't seem practical for your business, and that's the reality. It's not to waste your time on a grant program. Talked about stimulus packages. There was lots that were set up through the COVID-19 shutdowns, state and federal governments, and I'll show you just some of the amounts of money that's been spent. The grants market, it's a really interesting market in how it works and what it is designed to do. And I say it because it's designed to do a number of different things for business. There's prepaid cash to support an activity. It could be matched dollar for dollar. It could be matched 30 cents from the government and 70 cents from you. It could be matched 100%. We've just done one in emerging aviation technology and it was 100% funded. I haven't seen a 100% funded grant now for about 15 years. It is that rare to get one. We were overwhelmed by companies that came to us in the drone technology sector wanting to write applications for them. Each application was a consortium, and it was like a full-time job for 3 weeks to manage a consortium to bring all that information together. So it almost cost them more than if they had have employed someone in their business in that role for that same period of time to get me to come on board to do it. But it was the knowledge that I brought to manage the consortium to do that. Out of that, the offshoot is if they get their grant funding, it was $3 million they were looking to spend on some new technology in drones. So it'll be fantastic if they get the money. It'll cause an enormous amount of problems for CASA because no one told them this grant was coming out, and they'll have to rewrite policy because at the moment they have drone pilots, but they don't have drone pilots that can sit in a room that can't see the drone, and that's what this was all about, with some remote access to drones. The prepaid cash support is the most common program out there. If you look on any of the state or federal government websites, they'll have a program up and running and it'll dictate this is the rules and this is how much money you're eligible to get. Generally, it's around that $15,000 to $20,000 to get a grant. Postpaid cash, once you're completed, the Export Market Development Grant has been for the last 15 years a postpaid grant. You spend the money, get to the end of the financial year, then you give someone like me all of your receipts and we work through what's eligible and claim back the balance. They've changed the system going forward from this year. It now falls into the prepaid, but it's at 1/3 the level that it used to be when it was postpaid. So it's robbing some companies of getting back out into export after COVID. The Research and Development Program, which is where we do most of our grants and what we do, it's a tax offset. And so that program is postpaid. You've got to spend all your money up front and then claim it back afterwards, and it comes back either tax or it's offset against what your taxable income is to the tax office. There's not many postpaid grants out there because they require an awful lot of funding up front from you as a business, and that really defeats the purpose of what a grant's supposed to do, which is to support you and boost your company in what you're doing. The third one, and it's the unforeseen one, and it's the one that can help business do an awful lot, and it complements the work that Tom was talking about today. It's where you can get access to grow your business to do things, but you don't pay for it, but there's people and there's services the government pays for. And it's quite widely unknown and it's not very well published in there. But if people jumped on this would be the biggest gravy train to help them and help them in a lot of areas in what Tom ran through today. And it's delivering services by accredited service providers that can do training, so the registered training organisations, Tom spoke about those today. That whole gravy train has been enormous for the last 10 years. And we've seen the bad side. It's been washed through the news many, many times of the bad RTOs. And there's a lot of really good RTOs out there. And they can bring skills training into your organisation that can be fully funded by state or federal government, which if you can upskill your staff, what a great way of doing it if the government pays for it. Because of the whole labour challenges in the last 3 years, you can get a lot of money. It's something about $25,000 for someone over the age of 40 to come back into the workforce and give them some training. The state government does a grant program at the moment. If you employ a new full-time person in Victoria, you can request from the state government $20,000 to offset the salary that you pay them. And it doesn't matter at what level you employ them. They could be a factory hand working on the floor, they could be the COO. Factory hand working on the floor probably pays a third of their wage. The COO, it might pay a labour hire company what you're going to pay them in a fee. So it's all relative. But there's some really interesting things in where the grants are. On any given day of the week in Australia, there's over 5,000 grants available. So someone will come to us and they'll say, can you get me a grant from a company? Oh, sure, I can get you a grant. What one do you want? Well, I've seen this one. Do you know about this one? No, I haven't seen that one. It's impossible for any one of us in the grant space to know exactly what it is. It's a bit like going to buy a used car. There's thousands of them out there. Some of them may have come from Lismore and been flooded. You won't know till you look into the detail of that. But there'll be the common ones out there. So the common grant programs, most of us in this space know what they are. We'll often have companies come to us and say, I know about this program, I don't know how to do the submission. So we'll write the submission and do that work with them. But we may also find other grants that might be more applicable to what they do and how they go about doing that.
Chris, is there some sort of search engine where you could put in keywords that might spit out the grants that could apply to you or something?
There is, Mr. Ford. That's on slide 16. So I'll get to slide 16 if you like. I think that's at the 38-minute mark of the talk.
Oh, okay, good, thank you.
The average grant in Australia is only $5,000. Only $5,000. So I see a few of you look a bit shocked about that. Pete, you got 3 times that for your sporting club. You did really well to do that. We've done grants where we've got clients $800,000 and $900,000 back. But in 15 years, that's only happened a handful of times. So it's relative to what a company is spending to what they're after, but also what the grant program's all about. And that's the challenge of what is the grant program about. $1.7 billion has been spent by the Victorian State Government in the last 2 years to help those people that did put in an application. That was your $10,000, your $20,000, keeping your business door open, helping out the City of Melbourne but not helping any other local council out. It's a lot of money that somewhere that had to come from state government coffers. Now there's 2 ways they can fund it. They can go further into debt or they can use some of the funding for other programs and just squirrel it across here. It's been a combination of both in Victoria. So longer term, we'll have some challenges on what programs come out in the next 2 or 3 years because the money's just not there. And the state government doesn't have a lot of money now, and that's fairly obvious in where they're at. They weren't as rich as what the federal government was going into COVID. If you look at the federal government, they've spent around $189 billion across a whole lot of platforms in the last 2 years. Now there's about 60 of that was just in that JobKeeper program. So we all look at JobKeeper and think, well, gee, they saved 70 because they forgot about that 70 when they did their calculation. But the reality is there has been so much other stimulus that it is that much money that has been spent through the COVID period to keep companies alive. The only way our 2 governments have been able to do that, we're fairly wealthy. We went into COVID, we are a fairly wealthy country. We have a lot of first world problems. But our first world problems have allowed us to fund what we're doing, and we're probably far better off than a lot of others. The challenge will be, for you younger kids here, getting your head around it's a debt, but it'll be paid off because we'll still dig coal and we'll still fund it and we'll still do all those things. So I don't see the grants program being affected for the next 10 years because that money's been spent. They will find more money. Governments do that, and they seem to do it quite well. The key thing with any grant program, it's got to fit with policy, and it'll fit with the policy of the government of the day. And it sounds quite boring, and it is a bit of gibberish in what it is. 2 years ago, when a government put out a grant program, it was this broad. We've got this much money to give away, and you could write a grant almost to say that I'm going to make a plastic bottle and every one of them will have a red lid. Can I get a government grant for that? And you could. It was really that simple. Nowadays, there's so much more accountability because of the money that's been spent. So it's very measured that you have to write something very specific about what you are going to spend the money on. And it has to be able to be acquitted at the end of the program, or they will ask you for the money back. And I've seen that happen on 2 different companies that have done grants, not through us, but through others, and they've been asked to give the money back because they didn't do what they said they would do to do that. They didn't meet what the requirements were. Within that outcome, the first is facilitation and assistance to open doors and access key alliances. It's a big thing. What it is you can go and get access to Austrade to help grow your exports overseas, and the government will facilitate that. Generally, it's no cost to you in the first couple of meetings, but after that, they start charging you a fee for service to do that. And you can get that back through some other funding. Indirect support to deliver services through trade shows, through training, and through international trade missions. We'll see more and more of this type of government funding because there's so many bureaucrats that are employed now, they've got to do something with them. They can spin them out, they don't need them for COVID anymore, they've got all of the hotel quarantine sorted, but they've still got these people on their books. And the next thing will be, how do we stimulate business and give them the support? There's still a certain amount of fear of businesses travelling overseas, but there's a lot of business to be had overseas. When I was gainfully employed, I used to spend 3 to 4 months of the year sitting on planes and travelling around the world doing an export sales role to do that. Certainly through modern technology, we've got accustomed to Zoom and Teams and all those sorts of things. But nothing beats the old-fashioned getting off a plane, shaking someone's hand and being there in person. The government's option is to actually fund that by doing trade shows and using their overseas offices. They've got people, Melbourne, and certainly through the Labor and the previous Liberal governments, they've invested significant amounts of money putting bureaucrats in places where Austrade didn't put bureaucrats. So you can access a Melbourne government business office in California and you can use that office for free to do that. Do you ever hear about that? They're the poorest to actually sell their services. They need to come and talk to Pete Sandor and do a marketing program on how to tell the world of what they actually do. In the UK, in France, in Germany, the state government has offices there that are free to access for any Victorian company to go and use. Walk in, show your passport, they'll open doors up, they'll introduce you to local trading partners, they'll even help do the sales for you. Direct to business. That's me. That's the facilitation of the FlexiTeller. It's a financial gift or a contribution, or it could be stage payments. There's a lot of grant programs now that run for 2 years and you apply for it, you get approval, but you will get payments over the 2 years when you hit certain hurdles. And that's becoming more and more how government gives out money. It's a slow gravy train, not just one big hit, and they believe it's a better way to manage those bigger chunks of money. So grants above $30,000 and $40,000 amounts come through that financial gift. The financial gift, though, sits on your ledger as income. So you've always got to be aware, and right now when we're doing a lot of the R&D grants, is that we're deducting off that the support for all of the job seeker that came in and job keeper payments into business to keep their staff employed. We have to deduct that off because otherwise you're double dipping. So the government's already given you money, but you're going to claim that through R&D anyway. So you can't double dip. So we have to be very conscious that when you're looking at your stage payments, you're not then going after another grant somewhere else, because if it catches up to you, you could lose both grants and get nothing and have to pay both of them back. So it's quite a challenge at the moment, just navigating where you're getting a handout for the last 2 years and just managing where you're going for the next 12 months in where government money sits. Who's eligible? Pete's got a sporting club. So a not-for-profit, there's lots of money out there in not-for-profit world. But you can only be eligible if you've got a reasonable board structure, if you're an organised not-for-profit, and you're not a fly-by-night to do that. Unit trusts. Accountants love unit trusts. Great way to divert profits. Great way to divert profits when you are profitable. I'd say about 85% of the companies that we work with come to us and they're a unit trust. They're less than 5 years old. They've made no money for 5 years. And I say to them, why are you a unit trust? Oh, my accountant said this would be the ideal way to disperse some income and some revenue and we wouldn't have to pay tax. And I look at them and say, have you paid tax yet? No, I haven't paid tax yet. We won't pay tax for another 5 years. Well, you're not eligible for a whole lot of things. You're not eligible because you're running as a unit trust. So if you run a unit trust, set up an incorporated entity as the trading entity. It's a really simple way of doing it. You can still disperse your profits through a trading entity into a trust and do whatever you want to do. There's people smarter than me like Peter Lay that can help you sort out that. That's what you've got an accountant for. But I'll look at it as to, if you want to get grants, get on the gravy train. Get an entity that's going to be eligible.
So just on that, Chris, the unit trust can be the sole shareholder for the incorporated entity?
Can. Under the R&D program, it's the only grant program, Pete, where the ATO legitimately says you can't claim under a trust. If you set up an incorporated entity and bill across all of your R&D, we will accept doing a grant on that basis.
Does the same hold for discretionary trusts?
It does. It does. It's just about how we sing that song, and there's just that clear division between the trust and the operating entity to do that. There is still a lot of grants a trust can go for, but it makes our job harder and it makes your job harder just because of the reporting aspect around that to prove its independence and that it's retaining its revenue. Joint ventures and partnerships. Generally it requires one party to be the auspicing entity. So I talked about the emerging aviation grant we've just done. That was a consortium. They set up an incorporated entity that every member had one share into that. And we nominated one business and their bank account as the auspicing partner. But it was a consortium so that everything was above board. The people that assessed the grant could actually see the structure was clear, was concise. It didn't generate any revenue, but for the purpose of that, we could provide the revenue figures for all of the 5 partners in that consortium to do it.
Sorry, silly question. I haven't heard that term before, auspicing. What does that mean?
Means that one business narrator is the business that applies for the funding. The funding comes into their bank account and then they disperse that with the other partners into that structure. Sole traders and individuals. Really hard to get a grant for a sole trader unless it was a COVID-19 grant, because government didn't mind helping out everyone along the way. But sole traders are much harder to get grants for because the infrastructure is generally not in the business to support what a grant program's looking for. The one that I love the most because it's easy, it's got accounts, it's got basic structure around it, and it meets what all government departments like, and that's an incorporated entity. It's the most acceptable because it's tax paying, it's taxable, and governments like to be able to look up an ASIC register and know that it's all above board, and there's people they can chase after when it all goes bad. So it's just a really simple structure when you've got a company. The federal government is where most of us get grants from. The federal government at the moment, we might be in a caretaker mode, but ScoMo and his band of merry men and women in December passed a bill for $16 billion to sit in the kitty. And they quietly dispersed that 3 weeks ago before he went and called an election. So right now, there's an inordinate amount of money out there for business to jump on the gravy train. And even today, just before I come into town, ScoMo was out announcing another $50 million just for startup entities to jump into hubs and technology and all those sorts of things. They already put about 500 million a year into startups to do that. So the money's out there. In years gone by, the moment that we went into a caretaker government, there was nothing. Our work dried up overnight. We had nothing to do for 6 weeks. Right now, I'm the busiest I've ever been because they've been able to put the money into government agencies. The money's already been allocated, so it's just rolling on as normal. And it's almost as though there's no hiccup whatsoever through the caretaker government process in what's going on. We often see leading into the next 2 months that some government agencies will ring people like me and say, hey, I've got $4 million here. Do you know any companies that need to get a grant? I have to spend the money by 30 June because on the 1st July, if the money's in our account, the government takes it off us. Then they give us the new amount in the new budget. So we madly go and ring a few people and say, do you need some money? What are you doing? Where are you going? That hasn't happened yet. Generally about the 15th of May. Ring me on the 16th of May and I'll tell you what's left to do that. There will be money left because of this 6-week caretaker process we're in, that a lot of people think there's just no money out there. And there's lots. There certainly is lots. I'll run through some of the more specific ones that are just going to be ongoing. So irrespective of who's in government, these are ongoing grants to access every day of the week. Sustainability Victoria and sustainability through the federal governments have ongoing grants around solar, waste management, water recycling. They're getting now into the clean energy area and all those sorts of new areas because that is, as we saw last month here, the area that universities are now pushing is modern ways to generate energy to drive what we drive and get around. If you look at things like Department of Agriculture at state and federal government, they are seeing that through COVID, one of the untouched areas of Australia was the Department of Ag and all of our farmers because our animals still needed to be fed. We consumed a hell of a lot more because we wanted to eat the best steak at home. We all became the best chefs because we couldn't go out to restaurants. And just because of that, the Department of Ag, state and federally, have huge amounts of money to spend and they're spending it because it's there. It's where there's a lot of spending going on at that farm gate level. To order a tractor of any description, you're waiting up to 2 years at the moment to get one because farmers are so cashed up. You've only got to look at the price of lamb, of beef, of pigs with lipstick on them. Everything out there is really expensive when we go to the supermarket. And farmers are getting that reward. They're finally getting that reward. They went through 8 years of pain with drought through Queensland and New South Wales, and they're now getting some of the most record high amounts of return, and that stimulus is being spent. The Department of Education and Training is that we are seeing more than ever now, we are short 850,000 university students from overseas. We are short 950,000 international workers that were backpackers. So right now, our governments, collective, are wanting to reskill anyone. You could be 72 and a semi-retired doctor or a semi-retired pilot and you'll be reskilled just to get back into the workforce. And whether it be through an RTO, whether it be coming to a university like this, or whether it be going to a government university or a TAFE, there is an awful lot of money to get a free education. And it is just rolling out at an unbelievable level. Regional Development Victoria. Regional development is one of the fastest growing areas. If you look at Bendigo, Ballarat, Traralgon, Shepparton, Albury, Wodonga, that's just in Victoria. Those cities are growing faster than what metropolitan Melbourne's growing. With the infrastructure that's being built, you can't get a builder for 2 to 3 years. There's people that have had the move in the last 2 years to go and buy the nice big house in the country, pay half the price of what they cost to live in Melbourne, and they've relocated. And through RDV, there's innovation, there's jobs, there's growth, supply chain. They're wanting to make sure those people are gainfully employed and that employment doesn't lead to unemployment. Because the last thing we want is any of those large rural cities to have high unemployment. So you've seen a lot of government departments have moved out of Melbourne. They've tried to follow where their staff have gone to live Geelong's been a beneficiary. Bendigo and Ballarat have been huge beneficiaries with TAC and all of those sorts of big groups moving. And at a federal level, 2 years ago, just before COVID hit, we saw the Department of Ag was based in Canberra, and that miraculously set up in Tamworth, just down the road from where Barnaby Joyce lives, to do that. Coincidence? Maybe it was. But at the same time, it just shows that they can get cheaper housing and live a really good lifestyle and be on a government salary to do that. So governments are spending money to encourage more of that to happen. Department of Health and Human Services, they're playing a huge role because the last 2 years we have seen an inordinate growth in mental health issues and in just general normal health issues. We've all got a little bit heavier, we haven't done the exercise, and so they're now looking at how they fund that. Come in, young man. Good to see you. Welcome back. Does everyone know Tony? You can take this on if you like. And through the Department of Health and Human Services, they were never geared up to do what's happened in the last 2 years. No one was geared up to deal with the last 2 years. So their role has been increased, and so they're now trying to roll out as much they can do. You look at a little town like Mansfield, only got 8,000 people. It's called a bush hospital. So if you get a paper cut, you'll get looked after. If you cut your finger off, you're sent straight out. They don't have 3 ambulances, they got 2. So when you look at those sorts of things, our rural areas were never built to handle what we're now trying to build out. Through local government, there's grants around roads, local health services, getting your permits, and this is a really big untapped area. And I'll talk about this and some stakeholders on a project we're doing with a new sale yards in Gippsland, is that we walk them through all of these 7 steps I've just done as to where they can access grants for cattle sale yards. So it was a really interesting way of looking at it. And then you get local authorities. And the Latrobe Valley Authority is set up, it's run by a group of business people as a board of directors. The money is fully funded through the state government, and it's to encourage people to move to Gippsland with their business and give businesses support to grow. And I've put them up because we're all aware of the move away from coal and coal-fired power stations. So they've got this group of people that are all our ages that are going to be skilled in digging coal out of the ground and making it burn, but not skilled in any other way. So this was set up to help reskill those people, but to help business take on those new skills and those people to do that. And these are all the sorts of areas, these 8 areas, every day of the week there's grants that are available from them. They're near impossible to find until you get to slide 16, Mr. Ford. But it just shows the diversity of where grants and support programs are at. Funding and support programs are all about trying to help a business succeed. The last 2 years was about trying to help us personally succeed to get through Friday night drinks with 40 so that we could all get to next Friday night, and it was funded by JobKeeper. And while I joke about that, it made such a huge difference to most businesses because some of the profit and losses I look at the moment, they've got 100, 200, 300,000 in JobKeeper payments. They all retain their staff. The greatest challenge now, they can't get more staff when they need them to do that. So you can look at some programs and be really critical, and we all were critical of those. But we also look at 4% unemployment, and at 4% you really are getting to the bottom of the barrel of people that either can't work or won't work, or are in a skilled area that they can't get a job locally of where they do live. And so at 4% we really are doing pretty well as a nation in where we're at. When you go searching for different programs, one of the first that we look at is the Entrepreneurs Program. How are we going, Mr. Ford?
12 minutes.
12 minutes, thank you. The Entrepreneurs Program, federal government, it's where you can get someone to come and work with you that's a skilled professional, and it's funded up to $50,000. It's also where there's programs to fund over 3 years up to $150,000 to work with universities, and we do that with a lot of our clients. Get access to some of the best facilities, and you get access to students that are wanting to complete a PhD and they're desperate to work with business. One of the best thing about the Entrepreneurs Program, really good way to recruit staff right now, because you can get someone works on your business, and then when they've finished their PhD, drag them into your company. So you already start to get them vested into what you're doing. CSIRO has a Kickstart program. It's to do research activities. The worst thing about the CSIRO, it will take you 6 months to get it all signed up. They are the most useless organisation in Australia with a commercial mind. Some of the people that I work with at CSIRO, and I'll go to them and say, hey, we've got this project, are you interested? Yes, we're interested, but I don't think we can do the commercial side of it. They're still working with Blackboard, some of them. You would think that they'd be far more commercial, and they struggle with commercial reality, sadly. The Export Market Development Grant, spend up to $145,000, up to $300,000, get $145,000 back on your export marketing. Great program. It will help businesses do what now needs to be done, and that's to get back out there and sell what you do. The R&D tax incentive, I spoke briefly about that before. It's an offset program for eligible R&D. It requires a fair amount of keeping notes. We like to get involved with companies early in the process, walk them through that, and then do their grant rather than try at the end to be playing catch up. We've seen in the last 2 years manufacturing investment programs at the federal government level. They've been sticking $200 and $300 million in an account, and then it's generally up to $1 million you can get to put money back in and invest in manufacturing back in Australia. It's a shame that it's taken the federal government 30 years to realise that all of this manufacturing's been going offshore because it was cheap. I took Pete out to a client a couple of weeks ago in the plastics industry, and they're trying to buy some new equipment because they've weathered the storm since 1968, and they're winning clients back now, not because they're cheap, they're more expensive. It's that clients can't get their stuff out of China, so now they're coming to this company. They need some succession planning, and they need a bit more of Pete's work. LaunchVic, we suggest anyone that's in a startup that there's plenty of things around Launch Victoria. It's about helping startups. There's about 150 hubs in Melbourne now that you can go to get help if you're a startup and you've got an idea as an entrepreneur. And then around all the government specific programs at state and federal level. One of the nicer ones that's just come out, and this was announced with no fanfare about 6 months ago, Breakthrough Victoria. They have billions of dollars coming their way over the next 25 years. And there's 4 streams under Breakthrough Victoria to actually help someone that wants to go from a pilot to a commercial build, and they'll invest in that. They'll take a stake in that, and they can also loan you money, and they can also be a grant for you. So they offer you different avenues. They have another stream where you can be upskilling your staff and upskilling your program. This is one that we'll suggest to the MP to look at that. And it premises all around owning or nearly owning your own IP and looking at patents and those sorts of things. Very similar to what Tom presented around managing that side of it. And if you do, Breakthrough Victoria is one that we're recommending to a lot of people. Slide 16, Mr. Ford. Government programs. vic.gov.au/grants. It's updated every day of the week. It's about the only thing other than the COVID numbers each day that they seem to update. It gives you all the programs. It's a fairly easy website to have a look at, and you just click on which program you want to look at, and it tells you all the details and whether it's open or closed to do that. The federal government grants, they actually have one called Grant Connect. It's easier to Google Grant Connect than write down that and all that gibberish. A commercial one is called Grant Guru. They offer a service where you can plug in what you're searching for, and it taps into those 5,000 grants that I talked about. Grant Guru is probably the only one that actually has that reach to get across all the different grant programs. In all of the other states, they have forms of the Victorian government one. The New South Wales one's near impossible to navigate, so I don't even suggest people to go and look at the New South Wales one. Alternatives to grants. Lots of alternatives. University partnerships. Because they are short 850,000 students, they are desperate to get business to help fund them these days. They will open their doors for you to go to them and say, I need some help to do this, and they will find students to work on your project for you. The challenge will be navigating through the IP and who owns the IP. So I caution everyone that you manage your IP through that. There's a number of incubator hubs and co-working spaces. As I said, there's about 150 in Victoria alone. So government sees that entrepreneurship program as pretty important. Victorian government and the other state governments all have a Grow Your Business program. They all give you that $5,000 to $7,000. They give you a consultant. There's a marketing stream, a business strategy stream, and then a business review stream that comes out of that. And it helps you then come out with a business plan at the end of that. There's networking groups. Vic Leaders, I've been in it for 4 years, love it dearly, and there's a whole lot of resource you can tap into. And when Rob can't find someone in the group, he finds you someone anyway. So if you need someone, I just ring Rob. CSIRO, I said that bureaucracy is their biggest challenge, but they are actually good to work with when you get through that bureaucracy process. Venture capital and angel investors, they're a dime a dozen because everyone's got so much money now in that private equity market. The challenge is owning your IP and what your angel investor comes to get involved in. Private equity, friends and family, probably the most cautious ones because we can all know someone and there's a bad story somewhere in there, but there's also a lot of good stories and some successes. Bank finance, go and talk to Peter Lay. He'll find you some bank finance. It's cheap this week. Interest rates will be up next month. So get in now and lock it in before it goes up. The R&D tax offset program, if it's eligible, it's one of the best ways to get money back on what you spend in developing your own products if they're new or novel. And then, Pete, something that I would recommend that your sports club go and do is look at all the philanthropic groups that are around. And there is an enormous amount of money in that philanthropic world right now. Is that they have sat on their hands and there's some wealthy families that have got huge amounts of money to give out. And not just to sports clubs and not-for-profits, but to business as well to do that. And there's a range of those that are available. I put down there that when venturing beyond your immediate business structure, remember to protect your intellectual property at all times. 95% of the companies that come to me are so quick to tell me their story and are so slow to get me to sign a non-disclosure agreement that I could go and start up 100 different ideas tomorrow quicker than they could because I can access funding and they don't, and that's why they come to us. So when you go and talk to someone about your idea and getting some funding for it, make sure you protect it. Tom talked about the legal side of it. It's one of the most important parts of what you do. Because if you've got an idea and you give it to someone else, they'll find a way to fund it quicker. How to apply for a grant? Call me. That's the simplest way of how to apply for a grant. If you don't want to call me, work through all of these steps. Know what the grant is, know when it's open, know how to write a really good story. Get the lipstick, put it on the pig. If it doesn't look good, get another brand of lipstick, because that's what it is. It's about making that pig look really good. What not to do? The simplest thing is don't call me 2 days before the grant closes and say, can you help me? Which was what happened this morning as I was about to jump in the car to come into town when someone rang me and the grant closes on the 30th of April. The grant opened on the 1st of July last year. Can you give me some help? No, but I can do it for you and this is our fee. I don't want to pay you. Thanks very much, I've got to go. If you're looking for a grant, know what you're doing. We actually encourage companies to be organised now, and when the grant opens, then they're ready to apply for it. The most important thing you can do, Tom touched on this, know your stakeholders. So I talked earlier about the cattle sale yards we're working with. When I sat down with them, they're spending about $50 million on a new sale yard, and it'll service about 250,000 farmers across central Gippsland because of all the others that are closing down. So when they wanted some money, they said, we're employing 35 people, and they wanted $5 million. Government won't give you $5 million to employ 35 people. But if I look at the stakeholders that are involved and present this as the lipstick on the pig, they'll be more interested in doing that because it impacts so many more people and so many businesses. What we do. Really quick, Rob. We learn about your grant requirements. We ensure that you're eligible for the selected program you're in, and quite often we'll recommend 2 or 3 others that might be coming up that might be better for you. I say we develop your submission because we've got to go and find the lipstick that's the right colour for you, and quite often that can be difficult if your house is not in order. We'll go through and provide that additional information that you need because we're experienced in doing that work. And then we like to come back and celebrate your successful grant. Thank you, Mr. Ford.
Well done.